Today's episode is brought to you by Greenman Open. In a world of market swings and geopolitical shifts, it's natural to look for investments built on something more foundational. That's the thinking behind Greenman Open, a European long-term investment fund focused on one of the most resilient sectors there is, grocery-anchored real estate. The idea is simple. However the economy fluctuates, people still need to buy food. Open invests in the essential grocery retail properties that communities rely on every day. The fund earns income from investors from the rent those tenants pay, aiming to provide a source of stable, long-term income. It's a regulated fund designed to make this type of real estate investment accessible to everyone. You can become part of Greenman Open from just €1,500, either through your financial advisor or directly with the Greenman Open app. To learn more, visit greenmanopen.com. A quick but important note, all investments carry risk. The value of your investment may go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you invest. Past performance is not a reliable guide to future performance. Hello and welcome to this edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Lise Hand.
And I'm Shane Coleman.
Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. Shane, many of you will know from co-presenting Newstalk Breakfast, and Lise Hand has been a journalist for many years, worked for many years in Leinster House for various newspapers, and is a regular contributor to The Last Word and various other parts. And I should say as well, both of them worked with me in the Sunday Tribune many years ago now at this stage.
Many years ago. Good days though.
They were very happy
days. This is probably
days.
the first time we've sat at a table together, but certainly without pints in front of us anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
Who's saying this? Oh yeah, the cameras are on. There is no pints in front
Just
of us.
cups of tea.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just wanted to say that there might be people who think, oh God, this is going to be an echo chamber. They're going to agree with each other on everything. I don't think we've ever agreed with each other on everything.
Definitely not.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Not. No.
There,
Okay.
see, we're already disagreeing on that.
Okay. Look, I want to talk later about the President Connolly inauguration, which I know you were at for
Yes.
work reasons, Lise. I want to talk about Billy Kelleher and his assault on Fianna Fáil's direction, which he made at a speech last Sunday, and then I interviewed him on The Last Word on Monday about it as well. If we get time, we might talk a little bit about an interview that Holly Kearns did with the Irish Times, and she also was on the Late Late Show on RT, I think, wasn't she, last weekend, on her return to the leadership of the Social Democrats after her maternity leave. But I suppose the thing we want to start with is the new housing plan, which was announced by the government on Thursday with much fanfare, which was the fourth housing plan in 12 years. We had first one from Alan Kelly, then we had one from Simon Coveney, then we had one from Owen Murphy, which Darragh O'Brien took over. So this was the first Fianna Fáil-led announcement. But Shane, if I start with you in this, could it be that people at this stage have very little truck with or give credence to announcements or plans of what is about to be done?
Yeah.
That all they want to see is houses and apartments being built.
100%.
And this government and previous governments have just become the masters of announcing plans and allocating budgets and doing shag all to implement them.
I couldn't agree with you more, Matt.
God, we're supposed to be agreeing with each other, remember?
Sorry, I totally disagree with that. No, look, the plan insofar as it goes is fine. I don't have any issues with it. There's definitely some good things in it. I would worry about the fact that there isn't an annual target, and I know why that isn't there. That's there for not there for political reasons. But I do think you need to keep you need to keep them concentrating, keep the various groups concentrating on delivering on those targets.
Sorry, so you're saying, is a target actually a good idea in the sense that what's the point of issuing targets which can't be met and which cause a political problem for you? A bit like Darragh O'Brien will be forever damned by the fact that he promised 40,000 new homes last year, did it in front of the election when knowing it wasn't going to be met, and then had that hanging over his head.
Yeah, but
afterwards.
I slightly disagree on that, because even missing a target and having it publicly announced, I think, is a good thing, because at least we know where we're at. And if you go back to, do you remember Enda Kenny's jobs plan, the jobs task force that he set up, and Richard Bruton, I think, was the one who was driving it, and they had weekly meetings, they had set targets, and everybody knew what they had to deliver. So I do think targets are really, really important. But to go back to your original question, we've had enough of plans. What we need now is deliverability. And that's where the government has failed. I've been hugely disappointed with Micheál Martin in the last year. Do you remember he came in as Taoiseach and I thought, wow, this is an old man in a hurry, Sorry.
Oh, you're saying at the age of 65 he's an old man?
Well, yeah, that's what they call Sean Lamass. Sean Lamass was described as an old man in a hurry.
Generation.
Yeah.
He wasn't going for sea swims and eating kiwis for breakfast.
He is a very young 64 or 65, whatever he is. There's absolutely no question. But this is his last run at it. And I kind of got the impression that a bit like Haughey in 1987, he came in with the bit between his teeth. He was determined to get things done. He was going to kick arse. He didn't do any of that. Now, and you were talking about this last week. Did he get distracted by the whole Michael Larry thing? I think they lost a bit of momentum. Did he just run out of a little bit of gas? I've heard some people saying he looked a bit tired in the early months of it. But he had a serious mandate when he came back to do stuff. And somewhere along the line, he appointed James Brown as Housing Minister. And James, as you have spoken about on the podcast, took some time to get going. And I think that probably didn't help. But they just didn't. They need to hold people to the fire. They need to hold local authorities to the fire. What I'm hearing is they're calling them in one by one, the local authorities, and basically telling them they need to deliver. Some of them are going, yeah, we will. Others are being difficult. The state agencies, the Irish Waters, the ESBs, these are all acting autonomously, like they're in their own bunker. They're not pulling together. And so forget about targets in a way, forget about plans. What we actually need is somebody at the top, like Haughey did with the IFSC, like he did with Temple Bar, like he did even with the spending cut, saying, I'm actually not interested in problems, I'm interested in solutions, and you better start delivering.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I do actually agree with something, the main thrust of Shane's argument, which is it's all very well to have a plan, but it's actually all about the implementation of that plan. And what they seem to be trying to do with this is break through all the silos, try and slim down some of the massive big sticky ball of red tape that seems to surround every initiative. And they do seem to be trying to bring in everything from government agencies to actually thinking about things like utilities, water, where's everything going to come from? And they've never managed to do this successfully. Like, this is the trouble. They've never pulled this off. Now they're talking about having a housing czar.
Oh, sure, they've been talking about that since early this year, and they haven't got around to appointing the person yet.
Exactly.
But they should, you know what? They should have faced down the media and appointed the head of the NTMA and said, we're paying him 400 grand. What are you going to do about it? Like, we got sidetracked in this ridiculous, like €400,000. Like, it's peanuts if you look at the housing budget.
You wouldn't buy an apartment in Dublin 4 for that.
You wouldn't buy an apartment nearly anywhere for that.
It's not. I'm not suggesting it's peanuts in terms of the salary. It's a huge salary, and a salary most people can only dream of. But in terms of what we're spending on housing every year, the billions of euros we're spending, I don't care. If he delivers in terms of knocking heads together, I think €400,000. Well, no, I was talking about the NTMA head. So he is a he. Yeah. If he delivers on that, I think he's worth every cent. But instead, as usual in this country, we get sidetracked with irrelevant issues, and that ends up taking up months. And now, as you say, we still don't have a housing czar appointed.
Yeah, I think...
Sorry, but we also have known for quite a long time about all of these issues in relation to water infrastructure and electricity. This is not today or yesterday that these things have come up.
No.
We've been talking about them for years. So if you take the example that we've mentioned on this podcast many times, but it's still a relevant example, Irish Water needing the wastewater facilities at Clonshock, which is essential for making sure that we don't all have sewage coming back up our pipes. But also is absolutely crucial for building new houses. If you were to fulfil the ambitions of building all the new apartments and houses in Dublin, you have to have this in almost immediately. From 2018, it's been announced it's going to be 2032 before it's done. And surely, not now, we're told early in the new year, new legislation to make sure that it'll be more difficult for objections and to go for judicial reviews and all the rest of it. But why didn't it done last year, 2 years ago,
why didn't it happen 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Why do we always have to be in crisis before we actually get things done?
We always end up with a reactive government. It's as simple as it's two things. They tend to be reactive rather than proactive, because proactive means making decisions, some of which might be unpopular with the electorate. So they prefer to wait until something reaches a crisis and then we have to do something about it. And also, successive governments haven't been particularly brilliant at joined up thinking. I mean, gentlemen, I present to you the Luas. I mean, that was a huge piece of infrastructure, and they managed to build the 2 lines without actually putting an interconnector,
Initially, they did afterwards.
But that meant that the Luas. I remember interviewing a few people around the time of the interconnector, and I got the impression that successive plans for the Red Line and the Green Line, went through all the departments, and it wasn't really investigated why the 2 lines were not going to be joined up at that point. I mean, that's literally joined up.
Gareth Fitzgerald said that Lewis couldn't take the corner at Trinity College.
That's exactly what I was about to bring up. But you see, sometimes we argue, all the times we used to argue about cost overruns in Lewis and the cost overruns on the Port Tunnel. Can you imagine where we'd be now if we didn't have those in Dublin?
Yeah.
We're going
to Terminal 2. I remember being out in the airport when Terminal 2 opened, and it was regarded as... And actually, it was...
Were you there when Michael O'Leary drove up in the hearse?
Yep. And I was there, and I distinctly recall it was one of Brian Cowan's... Brian Cowan was under siege at that stage because it was literally the weekend the IMF were rumoured to be coming in. They did.
They did.
And there was a mad scrum in this beautiful, shiny, empty, Creek Fort the Doe, and everybody was going, that's a white elephant. We're completely screwed. Nobody's going to use it except to leave the country. It's going to be an echoey chamber, and lo and behold, now we are where we are in the airport, just stuffed to the gunnels. Yeah. So, I mean, that's an example of this won't work, huge amount of negativity, we don't need this. And again, it's standing up.
Well, I can give you another example from the airport, which nobody cites, but we now have a second runway in Dublin Airport, which was built on time and on budget.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody gives credit for the fact that it was built on time and on budget. The terminal cost, I think, about 970 million in the end, went way over budget. Yeah. But in retrospect, it probably still was a worthwhile investment that we couldn't actually do without. And we used to be actually very good at building things in this country.
We did.
We went, and I think we went from having about 10 or 20 kilometres of motorway around 1990 to having over 1,000 kilometres now. We got it built. We got it done.
And those roads were generally built on budget.
On
time
and on budget, yeah.
And we have all over Europe at the moment, we have Irish engineering firms and construction firms involved in building the infrastructure and winning the contracts and doing them on time and on budget. Yeah. So why is it not possible to do all that in Ireland? It's not actually that we don't have the capability to do it, but we have whole problems and issues in relation to processes and tendering
and legal challenges
and planning.
I mean,
so we handicap ourselves.
We have an issue at the moment building greenways. Like, we have people objecting to greenways and compulsory purchase orders of greenways, and politicians are pandering to that. And a group were protesting outside the Dáil in the last number of days, and politicians were welcoming this and supporting this instead of saying, "Hang on a minute, we've got to start putting the common good before private." But because of our electoral system, we will never do that, because every single vote counts.
But that's really it. That's actually weird, because I was literally about to jump in and say the interesting thing in some of the commentary around this plan, the housing, the new housing plan, was I think it was Simon Harris or somebody said that they were going to, I think it was reported Ellen Coyne in the Irish Times, front page 1 of the Irish Times, that they were going to concentrate on prioritising housing for families and for children, because they want to get this fact there's 5,000 children on
in homeless housing.
In the homeless
yeah.
But I think the phrase that was used by somebody at the press conference was, "We decided this was for the common good." And it struck me at the time, it's not a phrase I've heard much used, bandied about.
There's very few votes.
It's very socialist, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, we're not short of socialism at the moment in this country.
Second guess
but we don't really live.
Simon Harris.
We talk socialist. We don't really act socialist. And you're right. The common good is completely. Can I just briefly just give you what I think is a metaphor for the housing crisis? It's a very small metaphor. 2 houses around the corner from me in Phibsborough, probably a mile from O'Connell Street, maybe even just a kilometre from O'Connell Street. I've been living there for 30 years. For most of the 30 years I've been there, those 2 houses have been derelict. Yeah. They are now, I think, have been compulsory purchased by Dublin City Council, but they are still boarded up. Everything takes an eternity.
Yeah, and this is, I think, is even just from the point of view of not really optics, but it's sort of, we'll call it vibes, okay? Just for a second, we call it vibes. If you were particularly living somewhere and people are screaming for houses, particularly say in the smaller towns and villages, and you're looking at the same border of properties for years, it just creates a negative effect. It looks terrible for a start. It gives the town or the village the notion that they're being neglected, or there's neglect, or there's somebody's taken money somewhere to leave this derelict. So even if the number, they're talking about 20, I think they've something like they're bringing in 20,000 derelict houses in under the remit of this. Now, the number of derelict houses, depending on the agency or the company or the organisation you talk to, goes from about 80,000 to 200,000. Yeah. But I think it's a bit like the broken windows thing that Rudy Giuliani introduced in New York. When you start making the place look tidy and give the idea that people actually care, and you start bringing in some kind of ground up regeneration and rejuvenation.
It'll
lifts
fail.
Everything.
That'll fail.
No,
they won't deliver on that.
No, let me give you another idea. And this is one that I became aware of a few years ago when I was doing a book on Who Really Owns Ireland. And there's a couple down in Cork, Jude Sherry and Frank O'Connor, involved in the Niche project. And they've identified dereliction and said since they've moved back to Ireland, they've been horrified by the amount of dereliction and the belief that you have to regenerate existing properties rather than demolishing or always building new ones. But they gave me the idea about stuff about things like, instead of compulsory purchase orders, compulsory sales orders. So think about it, right? A compulsory purchase order really means the state taking possession of it. And then if you see the experience of the local councils, actually, when they're turning over houses between tenants, there's some appalling delays. They are so slow, and you end up having vacancy for an enormous amount of time. So putting the state in charge doesn't necessarily always mean the best thing. But if you
it's very slow in happening. Everything is slow in happening.
If you have a compulsory sales order, right, that basically forces things saying it's use it or lose it. And you can't leave it derelict. And rather than punishing them necessarily with taxes, which they mightn't pay because they mightn't have the income to actually pay the taxes, say, well, you haven't used this house for the last 5 years. Well, then, tough luck. You have to sell it. Yeah. And then it's open to people in the private sector or whatever to buy it and to do it up again. And that would be a way of actually...
I like it. I can still see problems. I mean, what are the...
Constitutional issues with
constitutional,
property ownership.
legal issues, finding out who owns the properties. And one other thing...
Probate and things.
Some of those properties being owned by the state already and state agencies.
Oh, this is a disgrace.
Who are saying, we're going to hold on to this. And don't you think you're having it?
The Land Development Agency, they've done a couple of reports in relation to this, and all of the land that could be used for major housing developments. And basically these state agencies and the HAC and stuff turn around and go, oh, no, we have our own plans for that. Yeah. Or we want to sell this in the
little
open
mini
market
empires.
But I do see the merit in that. I mean,
I can see the merit in it.
Looking at the new housings are...
but sorry, they couldn't afford it. Don't be mad.
Yeah, they couldn't afford it. But there is merit in that.
But you said about joined up thinking. There was a great story in the Irish Times on Thursday, which I forgot to send on to you. It was in the business pages by Barry O'Halloran, and it really, really grabbed me because I don't know if you saw this story. There's proposed rules for transporting extra heavy loads on Irish roads will affect the efforts to boost electricity supplies and put a strain on the climate targets, right? According to the hauliers, right? Electricity companies are looking to move equipment weighing up to 730 tonnes, right? To get, to deal with the energy shortage, to tackle greenhouse emissions. But the hauliers say there's rules now coming in from the Department of Transport, led by Transport Infrastructure Ireland on the relation to this, regarding the transport of abnormally heavy loads. Limits of 400 to 450 tonnes in Irish loads. So how do you move the equipment? So what is, you have to get special permits for extra heavy equipment, and it can take you have to apply for them up to 12 months in advance.
Oh, for the love of God.
So where's the joined up thinking?
Well, see,
that's a great example.
This comes back.
Example.
Does this not come back to Brendan McDonagh and the 400 grand salary, if that was
knocking heads together,
knocking heads together with the Taoiseach, the muscle of the Taoiseach of the day behind you, saying, if you don't do this, you're going to be getting an angry call from the Taoiseach, and you better get on board.
See, and of course, the trouble is because some of the departmental silos are harder to, break into than your average Norman keep. They've been there forever. They're,
Sorry, what's a Norman keep?
Dear, do you not know your history at all?
No.
It's a big square castle, right, that was built out of big blocks, and it was assailed with cannonballs and arrows over the centuries, and is still standing essentially.
It's good to have an intellectual person amongst us, Shane.
I miss that knowledge that Lise used to bring to proceedings back in the day.
Or just complete bull. But to see a high wire act, you never know what you're getting.
You see, the other thing that strikes me as well is that the opposition reaction to this plan, Shane, is that, oh, this is a developer's charter and all the rest of it, right?
Listen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me just give you an example.
You've already got me going.
Okay, because Craig Hughes in the Irish Daily Mail had a story on Monday, and when he went through the figures, 44,000 planning permissions that have not been acted upon, not a brick laid in relation to it. And these are nearly all apartments, which we need. And the reason being for this, now, that figure is interesting in itself, in that, this idea that everything is held up by judicial reviews is not quite true. Only some things are held up by judicial reviews. There are times when developers do not act upon the planning permissions they get. But you got to think of, why wouldn't they? If this is, suppose, if it's all about, is it unprofitable for them? If they could make money out of activating those planning permissions, they would. And that's why changes are needed. So to then suddenly say, this is the developer's charter, I mean, can the state finance and build 50,000 units a year? No, it can't. And the government surely has to find ways to make sure that private sector developers do the building, to sell into the private sector, to sell to the institutions who will rent, and also, as it happens, will actually do the building on behalf of the state. And sorry, again, everyone quite correctly points out that local authorities used to have big building interests. But back in the 30s and the 50s as well, it was companies like McInerney's came to the fore doing this work on contract for the state.
Developers are not angels, and I'm not going to pretend that they are, and they're in it for profit and their own profit, and they will act selfishly. And look, that's the way it works. But we've got to move away from this narrative of the vulture funds and developers being evil and developers' charters. That is the reason why apartment building has fallen off a cliff in the last year. We need developers, for better or for worse. We need them. We need them building stuff. And this narrative that private sector building is somehow evil and wrong is absolutely crazy. And you're absolutely right. We need social housing. We need the state to get involved. We need the Land Development Agency. We need people in government kicking ass to make sure all this happens. We also need developers building. And there was an affordability gap. And that's why I think the VAT cut was the right decision. I think, and again, it's blithely dismissed by the opposition as pandering to developers, bringing back the Galway tent. That language, I think, is not only unhelpful, I actually think it's dangerous. I really do. And I think it's setting us back. There is no one solution to the housing crisis. Yes, the state needs to spend billions, but it can only scratch the surface of what needs to be built. We need developers. Yeah,
I mean, I think the apartments, the building of apartments is one of those, you can look and say, okay, there's, 5,000 children who are homeless and they have to be housed for every good reason. But apartments, I mean, I think the other figure was quoted was, the predominant need, is for apartments, because that feeds into the huge amount of, I don't know what you call them, like how they're not homeless, but they're home blocked. The kids living at home with their parents. I mean, on the news, the 6-1 News last night. Adult children. I mean, at the 6-1 News last night, they did a vox pop out on the streets, and, woman casually said, yes, all my children are at home. Another, woman, a young woman, I'd say she was in her early 20s, and it was like, pipe dream, I'm never going to own a home. So if you actually added figures like that, like the number of actual home blocked who really want to buy, would like to buy, or even rent, get out of that family home.
Even dare we say it, what was it, Owen Murphy's shared living. Shared living. The co-living. That was driven out. That was everyone had to run a mile politically from it. Why? Why exactly?
Well, I mean, it's not
the solution, but it's one solution. They got rid of the bed
sits back in 2013 or something as well.
Earlier than that, it was actually when the Green Party.
2013.
It was earlier.
Wasn't
it?
Okay.
It was. I think it was the Greens, and it was the late noughties. Yeah,
it was because it
may not have actually come
true. They had to
change
it again because the logic of that was, and I could understand why they felt felt, that
there was awful kips.
There was dreadful.
Yeah. And we can't have bad standards.
But and you needed much improved standards for bed sets.
Yes, definitely.
But the problem was, and one of the things we said, well, people should have the dignity of having their own toilets and bathrooms, and I could understand that. Except what happened then was lots of people had to go and co-share in houses where they didn't have their own en-suites in every room, and they were doing the same queue for the toilet and for the shower or whatever.
We're a great country for letting great be the enemy of the good. There is absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah, and I know this because, I don't want to, and you're right, you've already identified it. There were many dreadful bed sits which needed to be upgraded. But we're getting into the argument as well now, I suppose, about the apartment standards and the judicial review in relation to the change to the apartment standards. And you got to wonder, well, for single people or for separated people, our studio apartments and one-bedroom apartments actually fine without needing all of the actual other things that are suggested that you need on top of it.
Sure, I mean, you moved out of home and you moved into a bedsit, or you
shared.
Or you shared, and it was very much part of your kind of step from getting out of the family home, starting a bit of independent living. Buying your own, buying your own bread and milk, and generally just trying to, negotiate the world of being an adult as well.
Okay, just to say, we have a subscription edition which is going to be available to subscribers on Sunday. Dan O'Brien, the economist, is my guest on that. And one of the conversations that we have about housing links it directly to the immigration numbers coming into the country and the pressures been put on the availability of housing and the price of rent and buying because of the competition from immigrants coming into the country. And that is something we address in the subscription edition if you are interested in that. We need to take a break, and when we come back we're going to talk about the President Connolly inauguration, and we're also going to talk about Billy Kelleher and what he's had to say about Fianna Fáil, and more if we have time, with Lise Hand and Shane Coleman after this short break. While headlines focus on short-term market movements, some investments are built for the long haul. Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund that takes a decades-long view, investing in a portfolio of grocery-anchored real estate across Europe. It's an investment in the steady recurring need for food, in the supermarkets and everyday need shops that perform consistently, even in challenging economic times. Open aims to offer investors a way to access this stability through a single regulated fund. Learn more at greenmanopen.com. A quick but important note: all investments carry risk. The value of your investment may go down as well as up, and you may get back less than you invest. Past performance is not a reliable guide to future performance. Welcome back to the second path of Part to Power. It is Lise Hand and Shane Coleman who are with us today for our political discussion. So Lise, tell us about the President Connolly inauguration, because I know you were with me on The Last Word earlier this week yourself and Flora McCarthy, who is having done the the President podcast series. You were in talking about the inauguration, and I got quite a bit of flack afterwards for bringing up the closing of President Connolly. Listeners felt it was utterly inappropriate, particularly when I mentioned the estimated cost of €5,600 on her outfit. But then one listener actually said that actually it's art, that what people wear is actually art, and it's actually, we would expect our president to spend a few quid on looking the part.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
the
that
job.
sort of stuff drives me mad because, to be honest with you, the reason that, well, it was actually the subject of our close came up simply because on the back of somebody, one of your listeners, saying, "Are you going to talk about her outfit?"
Yes.
But I was actually going to raise it anyway, because as soon as Catherine Connolly stepped out of the car in front of Dublin Castle, I went, "Oh my God, she's wearing Mary Robinson purple." Because exactly almost to the day, 35 years previously, Mary Robinson, our first female president, had entered Dublin Castle wearing a Louise Kennedy purple suit, which is now actually in the Museum of Ireland. It's regarded as a historic artifact.
Art, whatever, yeah.
So it was also seen as, it had various connotations. It's a very Celtic colour, but also it was a colour, that sort of purple that was worn by suffragettes when they were looking for women's, the women's right to vote. The right to vote. So there was a huge amount of symbolism in that. And then I noted as well that, as it turns out, Catherine Connolly, her outfit was designed by the same designer, Louise Kennedy, who had actually designed Mary Robinson's. And I also noticed that Mary McAleese was wearing purple. So, and there were several members of the clergy wearing purple, but I think that was involuntary support. I don't think they were like,
that wasn't
flying
because
the
the
flag for
clergy were
feminism.
for suffragettes.
It
Yeah.
wasn't.
No.
But so it wasn't such a, if I say something about a woman's clothes at a time like that, it's, it's not frivolity. There's a genuine symbolism behind it.
Yeah, but you see, Shane, listeners pointed out to me, would I have asked about the price of Michael D. Higgins' suit? Or what the price of the suit
I doubt
is?
it cost $3,500, Michael D.
Well, see, I wonder, Shane, you always had the reputation as the best dressed man in the Sunday Tribune, right? Okay. And would you ever spend €5,600 on an outfit?
No. I wouldn't spend €560 on it.
Inaugurated as Uthra Hair,
yeah, look,
you probably would.
It is absolutely legitimate to say what the president is wearing and how much it costs.
Yeah.
That's telling people the facts. Is it legitimate to make a big deal out of it? I don't think it is. I don't, and you weren't doing that. I don't think it's really relevant. For me, what's relevant is what kind of president she'll be.
Yeah. What did you make of our opening speech?
I thought, look, it's pretty much exactly what I expected. It was nothing different. She rattled a few cages. I mean, there's two views in government as to what's going to happen with Catherine Connolly. One view is it'll all be fine. She'll be like, she'll get into office, she'll enjoy being in office, she'll enjoy being president, like me, Michael D. Higgins. She'll rattle the cages every now and then, but she will know how far to go and no further. That's one view. There is a less benign view that says this is going to be really tricky on issues like the EU presidency, on neutrality, particularly when the triple lock legislation comes through, on housing policy and all these issues, that it is going to be very, very difficult, and she will go further than Michael D. Higgins. And there is some concern in government about, but as I say, two views. I think it might be okay. I think she might be another Michael D. Higgins. The other concern, a third concern I had expressed, is it won't be Catherine Connolly. It'll be some of the people she has gathered around her who might end up being the problem. So
you're frowning at all of that, Lise.
Well, it's more bemusement rather than like outright disagreement. But I did sort of note to myself when I was leafing through the papers this morning, she's already out of the media coverage. I mean, there was some coverage of her first events on her first day.
Yeah.
But really, that's it then.
Welcome
she was
to the presidency. You'll
welcome to
largely
the presidency.
Forgotten.
She has now gone into the, past the gates of the Aris, and really, that's where the coverage ends, unless she does something that propels her back onto the front pages. And I took away from her speech that it was a campaign speech. I mean, it was the same sort of language that she had been using, on the campaign trail. And she was still very much siding with what she said, people who had been othered or silenced, I didn't really get the sense that she was sort of over the notion that she had been ridiculed and laughed at the campaign. And this was her kind of going, I've
lashing
won.
back.
Lashing back is too strong, but I think she still identifies. I got the impression, I could see that she was very much identifying with her campaign, and they were the plucky outsiders and the plucky underdogs, and they went up against the establishment. Thank God she didn't use the word elite, otherwise I'd be hurling myself into the Liffey in complete despair. But it was sort of hovering unspoken, and I really...
From the president of the country, from the first citizen of the country.
Yeah, from the first citizen of the country, I know, who's now sitting on a lovely salary of, 300k and, with a job that costs about 600 million a year. But
6 million, I think, in fairness.
6 million, yes. It was good. You know me in figures, you should never let me near a figure. But there is, I don't know, I get that sense, as Shane rightly says, there's a few things coming up like the EU presidency, like the triple lock. And I think she will find it hard to get out of that campaigning mode and into presidential mode, where she was trying to say she would be a president for everybody, but also catalyst for change. And they're sort of slightly contradictory statements. And she made those statements in the same sentence.
How can she be a catalyst for change when she has no power?
Yeah.
Also, she has mentioned a mandate, and a lot of people around her are claiming mandates for things like that this was a vote in favour of neutrality. That wasn't on the presidential ballot.
I mean, on what basis are they claiming that? That's absolute nonsense.
Because they won.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to start talking about mandates, what percentage of electorate stayed at home? So I mean, a minority
or spoilt their votes.
Exactly.
Votes.
So
yeah,
a minority, and I don't like saying this because she won the election fair and square.
Spoils. If you haven't voted or if you spoiled your votes, can you complain about who actually wins?
No, but it was certainly not a mandate to say we are keeping the triple lock. It certainly was not. Anyone claiming that is talking nonsense. I don't see how they can claim that. I'm sorry, the role of the president is incredibly limited. It is none of her business, quite frankly, whether or not we maintain our neutrality. And I don't think ending the triple lock is diluting our neutrality. Personally, others disagree. But it's the government's housing policy is none of her business. That's the business of the opposition to criticise, not hers. And if you take the job of president, that's the gig you're taking. You can't complain about it.
I mean, I think it'll be telling who she selects for her Council of State. I mean, that will be a big indication of whether
the alarm bell should start ringing or not.
Mick Wallace and Claire Daly.
Well, I can't imagine she will do that.
No, she wouldn't. She wouldn't. She just wouldn't do that. But if they're in that mould, if they're very much of a certain idea, an ideology rather than perhaps social justice or social, equality and stuff like that. If they're more ideologues, that might give a notion that she is, forging what she called a new republic.
I'll make one bet
is.
now. It just struck me one name I'll suggest as somebody she'll put to the Council of State, former TD Maureen O'Sullivan.
Yeah.
Because, I think
that would be quite likely.
That's a good call, actually. Yeah. That's a good
she's,
call.
I think, universally popular and respected, but she's also very much
good call.
That is a good call. Look, I mean, Catherine Connolly is an extremely smart woman. She ran a very smart. I mean, the campaign she ran actually was quite like Michael D's campaign, because I covered both his campaigns, his presidential campaigns, and he was kept incredibly disciplined. I mean, this was the thing. When all the various Brown stuff was
with some difficulty, it has to be said, if you talk to his advisors at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, and I actually saw him. Do you know what? I actually saw this once. He was launching he was making a speech somewhere. I think it was maybe somewhere city centre. And he was on the stage making his remarks, and he deviated. You could see him deviate off. And he starts, I recall, la la la. And one of his main advisors, who had a beard, walked, which doesn't narrow it down at all,
no.
exactly as his Labour, walked past, literally got up from his seat and he walked past him, staring at him. And Michael D went straight back on script, right? So this was the thing, right? And when all the Brown stuff was sort of heading to the fans with, during the campaign, he kept it was easy enough for him to keep his head down, but he metaphorically kept his head down and he just stuck to the script. And his script was, and this is, I think, maybe where he does differ from Catherine Connolly, his script was, I know the absolute and utter limits of this role. I know constitutionally what my power is on. And when everybody else was going, I'll create jobs and I'll do this, I'll do that. He was like, I can't do any of that. And I think the electorate copped that. So he ran a very, very, very disciplined campaign. And on the back of he knew what the job was.
And then he maintained that into the presidency, the discipline as well. Although there were various speeches along the way. And there were more as he got...
Well, he got gate fever. Yeah, he got gate fever, definitely.
Towards the end. There was some extraordinary interventions when he criticised some dame or other, or whatever.
I mean, that's from Waterford who had been Dame Richardson.
That was an extraordinary intervention. There's one key difference between Michael D's election and Catherine Connolly's election. Michael D got elected by completely staying out of controversy and letting others take the heat. Catherine Connolly, I think, has changed how politicians will fight elections. I've heard this from a number of politicians saying they have taken lessons from how she did it, because she was in the line of fire for a good lot of her campaign. There was some serious flack thrown her, be it the trip to Syria or her
Irigy woman
in the Leinster House, where she argued that it was legitimate for a rehabilitation to go from prison effectively into the Oireachtas. But she deflected everything in a way I have never seen before. And the lesson I've heard this from
in Irish politics, because you see it elsewhere.
You see it elsewhere. But, I've heard it from a couple of politicians who've said, I have now learned that you know what? You don't need to convince all of the people. You need to convince a certain percentage of the people, and they will take that lesson. Catherine Connolly actually reminded me, and she will hate the comparison, I imagine. Do you remember that line about Donald Trump that he said, I could shoot somebody in
Fifth Avenue yeah, and get away with it.
And still get elected? I think Catherine Connolly could have shot somebody on O'Connell Street and still got elected.
Candidate Connolly is different than President Connolly, though.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
But I take your point, and you're completely correct, and would like to think maybe that some of the cabinet were actually maybe taking notes as well.
They were. I can tell you, they absolutely were.
Interesting.
You know what the big disappointment of the week, though, was that we didn't have the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party meeting last Wednesday night with the report on the debacle of the Fianna Fáil presidential campaign. Yeah. Though you have to say, I mean, I don't know how the delays came about, but a couple of things are amusing about that. I suppose it is the case that Micheál Martin needs to delay this for as long as possible to try and...
No harm to kick the can down the road.
Yeah, take the air out of the balloon a bit,
Kick the can down the road and over the wall of the stadium and further down the road.
And into Christmas Day.
Yeah, but it is funny as well is that Jim Gavin won't cooperate. I mean, isn't it?
Yeah.
You'd think that, I mean, my God, what he could tell whoever, the various people on the commission about how he was approached, how he was convinced to take on the role.
Did he get a fit of the collywobbles a couple of days beforehand? Was he persuaded to come back in? I don't know if these are true or not, but these are the rumours doing the rounds.
Yeah, I suspect from what I hear, and not from who people might think has told me this, but as
I don't know who you could possibly be referring to.
Somebody else did tell me that he wasn't completely ready to declare he was having the collywobbles, and then it was announced effectively, and he was bounced into it at the end, right? Yeah. He was 95% of the way there, but they hadn't agreed even things like his own personal financial contribution to the campaign, which was an important issue when you consider how important money ended up being to him. So we're not going to hear all of that. And he's able to say, no, I'm not cooperating because he's a private citizen, and because I think ironically he's not a member of Fianna Fáil.
He's not.
So,
no. So there's nothing he's entitled, perfectly entitled not to cooperate. So now look.
So does that mean will this inquiry ever get to the bottom of what happened if you don't have the man who was the candidate actually contributing to it?
I don't think it will. And I mean, some of the quotes coming out of from various disgruntled people who have been buttonholed already, it seemed to suggest that the line of questioning is very much not what went wrong, but how can we stop it going wrong again?
Yeah.
What
in 14 years' time.
In 14, well, Catherine Connolly could do a Michael D because he promised to be. Well, Michael D promised to be a one-term
and then
president,
circumstances changed,
and then looked into his heart and about the will of the people needed, precisely. So we don't know. Could be 7, could be 14. And I mean, there are, by the way, extremely legitimate conversations and debates to be had around the how the whole thing is conducted, from selections, nominations, and even possibly term length as well. So
which,
that's
of course,
a
they won't
be
for another 7 years. But anyway,
exactly. But this is but that's not the questions that people want answered.
No, but also isn't it? I mean, the Commission of Inquiry or whatever they're calling it in Fianna Fáil isn't really about the debacle.
No,
it's about Micheál Martin's suitability to continue leading the party.
I mean, this is it's all a nonsense. It's all an absolute nonsense. Look, we know what happened. Micheál Martin gambled. He thought he didn't want Bertie Ahern as the candidate for obvious reasons. He didn't think anybody in the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party, Billy Kelleher or otherwise, could win the presidency. I think he was 100% right on that. I think any Fianna Fáil TD, bar Micheál, who ran, would have got about 10% of the vote. Not that much more than Jim Gavin got. And he gambled on Jim Gavin and he got it completely wrong. He messed up. What more do you really need to know other than that?
But he's such an experienced... I mean, Micheál has been, in the game for so long, and for somebody that has survived so many, heaves and
but everyone
difficulties.
Everyone makes bad calls.
Yeah, but that's a spectacularly bad call.
Yeah, it's spectacularly. I could see why he went for... When I heard his name, I went... And I think most people did. I think there's a danger of applying hindsight to this. When I heard his name, I went, ooh, that's a left field one. That could work. I did. Now, I was spectacularly wrong. But I can see why. He had a profile. He was hugely popular. He had just transformed Gaelic football. He had chaired a citizens' assembly and come out of it quite well. I could see why they went for him rather than Billy Kelleher. Put it that way.
Okay, you could argue that the selection of Jim Gavin was an inspired idea. But the two things he should have done was obviously completely and utterly dive into his entire, say, financial dealings.
Very difficult though, Lisa.
No,
I mean,
it's not that difficult.
But like, it's up to the person to tell all that stuff.
Shane, I said on this podcast at the time, I asked if Fianna Fáil had done their due diligence, because I had heard stories about financial issues.
Yeah.
Right? And if I'd heard them in GA circles, I'm sure other people
my understanding
had as well.
my understanding was questions were asked and answers were given. And I mean, I don't know how you get to the bottom of stuff like that.
And the second point I make in this, and again, I have to say this one carefully, but anyone who would have covered GA over the years wouldn't have said he was a brilliant media performer.
No, he wasn't a brilliant media. And
that was shown in the debates that he took part in before he dropped out.
Yeah.
Well, that was the second thing I was going to say. I mean, apart from, look, it's like sitting in the Oireachtas committees, which I did for, on
way
many
too
occasions.
many years.
And, glaciers rose and glaciers receded, right? And you'd still be sitting there listening to somebody asking a question. And I think it depends on having somebody, if you're doing a vetting process, that knows how to ask the right questions, right? And get the right answers. Because just saying to somebody, it's like saying to somebody, how are you doing? And they're going, grand. That's
the great Irish answer, grand, which could mean anything.
Which could mean anything. So if you have somebody who can kind of, then actually go into it, then you're getting a full picture. But also, why didn't they just sit him down? Maybe they did, and maybe somebody else could, throw more light on this. But it would only take a few run-throughs with him
to know he wasn't up for it.
To really know he isn't up for it. And my God, the one thing you do need to be able to do if you're running for President of Ireland is communicate, because that's one of your
I think
few
we learned
jobs.
as well in the presidential election, you can't win a presidential election through debates, but by God you can lose it. And he lost it in that first debate. But sorry, one last point in this. A lot of the people who were giving out about Micheál Martin and his selection of Jim Gavin are the ones who were pushing for Fianna Fáil to run something. Micheál Martin didn't want to run anyone. I think if you go back to last May or June, I think Micheál Martin had his mind made up. We're not going to run anyone. And people in Fianna Fáil, these huge egos, they thought it was still 30 years ago that they were still the party of 45%. They insisted Micheál run somebody. Sinn Féin didn't run anyone. They got slagged off in the media for it. It worked out pretty bloody well for them. So a lot of the people who are criticising Micheál now have to take responsibility. They bounced him into running somebody.
Okay, one person who, of course, is making lots of implicit criticisms of Micheál Martin, even if he won't directly express no confidence in his leader, is his former friend, shall we say, Billy Kelleher.
I'm not sure they were ever that close, were they?
No, in the way that...
They had a certain loyalty to each other as Corkmen, although it is quite clear
the Cork loyalty is completely broken down.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
It is
Totally.
James O'Connor, Paddy O'Sullivan.
Seamus McGrath, Micheál McGrath's brother.
It's turned into like a series of The Wire. Everybody has their own corner now in the neighbourhood, So
anyway, this week Billy Kelleher made a speech last Sunday down for the Eamon de Valera commemorations down in Clare. Second time he's done it, and he wasn't expecting to be brought back, so somebody in Clare was making a point anyway. And he made quite a strong speech. He said Fianna Fáil is facing a demographic cliff edge, isn't even trying to attract young voters. He also said, which I thought was very interesting, Fianna Fáil must reclaim leadership in Irish unity from Sinn Féin, reconnect with the working class and marginalised communities represented in the past. I think he made the point there was a time when we were all growing up, probably, that lots of people joined Fianna Fáil. It was regarded as a movement. You got on by doing so. I mean, I know they have an active Ógra Fianna Fáil now, but it's quite small. The common base has fallen apart over the last couple of decades. And, it could be that Fianna Fáil did well not to be extinguished after the crash. And I think we were all surprised when it ended up, 17% of the vote back in 2011?
It's 17, yeah.
Oh,
and we were
shocker.
20 seats, 17% of the vote. But we thought it could go like the National Party in Canada and be wiped out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. And it's sort of re-established itself and it's come back into power, albeit in coalition government with Fine Gael and with the Greens previously, and a bit of independence now and the rest of it. But essentially, Fianna Fáil is sort of stagnant and receding, because it's a party for old people, for those who've had this historical loyalty for it. And I know it has some young TDs and it has some young activists.
Yeah, it does.
But nowhere near enough. So isn't Billy Kelleher absolutely right to identify it? And even one of the things that you might expect Fianna Fáil, if it went back to its traditional roots as a Republican Party, to show itself to be committed to the idea of United Ireland, except it has a leader who actually doesn't want to push that.
Well, I mean, I got the impression very much this was sort of a shots fired kind of speech, to be absolutely honest with you. It was, I mean, you know, he picked the occasion where he's talking about Dev. It's interesting the amount of times that he mentions the word leader and leadership in that speech. Many, noticeable enough that the word jumps out at you. Not one single, certainly according to the written speech anyway, there's not a single shout out to Micheál Martin from beginning to end of the whole speech. Lots of other people get shout outs. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, he also, one of the sentences struck me, he said, it'll require us to rethink current thinking within the party, to challenge existing orthodoxies and to be willing to accept that we have made mistakes. Now, I mean, my God almighty.
Who on earth could he be talking about?
Who could he be talking about there? So this was very, very much a case of shots fired. He sees himself as somebody who obviously wants to take a role, an active role in shaping the party and possibly acting as a kingmaker or queenmaker to or be, you know, for whoever's going to follow on. And, you know, the thing is, I mean, he does have some credibility in terms of where he could bring the party, because don't forget when the two referendums, the two big social referendums, the repeal the eighth and the marriage equality referendums, I mean, Billy was very much to the fore, you know, in sort of advocating for a yes vote and advocating that his party backed them up as well. I mean, he does come with sort of credentials. You know, he'd obviously be seen as a Europhile, obviously, because he's an MEP. You know, farming background, everything. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe he didn't have taken.
Now's your turn, Shane, to look sceptical.
I couldn't disagree more. Look, it's easy to be the naysayer in politics. It's easy to be the Liz Truss sniping away from the sidelines.
Billy Kelleher is Liz Truss.
Are you literally saying this?
You're right. Liz Truss actually went on to become Prime Minister. Billy is not going to become Taoiseach. I think we can say that.
Things have happened.
I thought the speech was nonsense. Quite frankly, nonsense. I did. Like, you know what? This isn't 1985 or 1975. Nobody's joining political parties. You think Sinn Féin?
They're joining Sinn Féin, aren't they? Sinn Féin.
Sorry, that's a myth.
Do you know Sinn Féin not have people on the ground in every constituency?
We saw the myth of the Sinn Féin machine, in inverted commas, during last year's local elections, when apparently there was nobody out canvassing. Whole tracts of the country went uncanvassed. It's an absolute myth. Yes, if you look at the at opinion polls, and I would do this with the Red Sea poll quite a lot when I'm writing about it, you break down, young people are voting more for Sinn Féin.
Or say they would vote for Sinn Féin, assuming they go out and vote.
But that doesn't mean that when they're 35 or 40, they'll necessarily vote for Sinn Féin. There is absolutely a demographic split at the moment in this country. There's no question about it. If you're over the age of 35, you're more likely to vote for the government. If you're under the age of 35, you're more likely to vote for Sinn Féin. That is about housing.
Yeah, I was about to make that point.
Housing is the issue that needs to be tackled. All the rest is absolute nonsense. And I mean, you know, the United Ireland. That's like Sheila De Valera's speech going back to the late 1979.
Yeah,
I mean, is that where we're at now? Look, there's no side. Fireside republicanism is back. Armchair republicanism is back. There's no doubt about it. And there is a market in that. But is that the road Fianna Fáil really want to go down? I've no time for it, I have to say. I didn't see any.
It's probably as much about making a bit of noise, and
this is personal.
It
personal. It's all personal. All the people who are giving out about Micheál Martin have an axe to grind. They're all unhappy with their lot. They all feel they're not getting the love and the care that they deserve.
There's been a huge amount of kind of, you know, left chatter, wing chatter the whole way through the presidential campaigns. A lot have been left on the, you know, left wing. Views been espoused, and it's quite likely that Billy just said, look, it's time that we, you know, the centre started making a bit of noise and just try and, you know, grab a bit of attention.
Grabbing attention, absolutely.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what it's about. Of course it's about grabbing attention. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, nowadays you don't have to join a party to vote for them. But I mean, if somebody goes, I like what he's saying, maybe we should go back to this, and he's
Can I just remind everybody,
Ireland.
It's 12 months ago since Fianna Fáil emerged as the biggest party in the general election, and Micheál Martin led them to that. And a lot of the people who were giving out about Micheál Martin wouldn't be in seats now if Micheál Martin wasn't the leader 12 months ago. I mean, do you know what? Getting rid of Micheál Martin, if they do, and I don't think they will ultimately in the next few weeks, getting rid of Micheál Martin for losing the presidential election would be like sacking Arnie Slot because Liverpool got knocked out of the League Cup a few years ago. Like,
well, losing a lot of games. Arnie Slot has lost more games than Ruben Amorim this year.
But
he has won a league title.
Do you fire him? Do you fire him for getting knocked out of the League Cup? The presidential election is the League Cup.
Hang on, they're losing matches all over the place, not just the League Cup.
You don't fire him because if you want to fire him in a month's time because he's lost loads of league games, fine. Not because he lost a League Cup game.
Maybe spending the money in Isak and Ekatiti is the football equivalent of spending money in Jim Gavin.
Yeah, I think the money they spent on those two are a bit more than the money spent on Jim Gavin, in fairness. I think you're talking more League of Ireland spends here, in fairness.
Well, I think there just comes a point where people are going, he's there long enough. I mean, and I know it's irrational, right, on one level, right? It's like he's there long enough. You know, we've been looking at him now.
I'm telling you, like the Tories went through this of getting rid of leaders constantly. It does not work. They are crazy. He's there for 2 years more max. Let him see out that term. Let him try and deliver on housing, and then plenty of time.
The Tories had put in some really duff leaders. Like, that's the difference.
Sorry, do Fianna Fáil have an alternative? This is the other thing. I mean, like, this is what we tried to tease out last week as well a bit. You know, if Fianna Fáil did decide to change, say, for example, it was Jim O'Callaghan.
Well, it would be Jim O'Callaghan.
It would be Jim O'Callaghan, right?
Yeah.
Well, Jim O'Callaghan might have an entirely different attitude towards coalition with Sinn Féin. And that's something that every Fianna Fáil member has to consider before they make a decision. Actually, I should tell a little story about Jim O'Callaghan. He turned up at the National Media Awards this week. Just say the National Media Awards are for the newspapers, organisations, for the written word, all of the newspapers, with the exception of the Media House papers, which decided to withdraw a couple of years ago. Enough said about that. So anyway, all the other newspaper journalists and the awards on Wednesday. For the last decade or so, I've been the host of the event and the Mansion House. But there's always a political speech. And it was actually due originally to be Taoiseach Micheál Martin who was due to speak at it. But as Jim O'Callaghan asked me to say, will you just make it clear, please, that I'm standing in for the Taoiseach today? Okay. All right. Okay. And it's sort of like, and I sort of phrased it in such a way that people might sort of understand, oh, he's standing in for the Taoiseach. Is that permanent or is that just a one-off, right?
Is that a sign of things to come?
Yeah. So anyway, Jim O'Callaghan took the stage before the lunch started, and the first thing I noticed was that he had no notes with him. I mean, we've all suffered through so many ministerial speeches where they just read a dead script prepared for them.
In one famous time, actually reading out the line, pause for applause. One junior minister. It happened.
Anyway, he gets up without a single note. And normally these speeches to the media awards tend to be worthy, and a lot about promises about making defamation reform and the rest of it.
And then not delivering on it.
And indeed, it was promised 12 months ago in a speech from his predecessor and would be done within 90 days if the government was re-elected, and nothing happened. So he didn't talk about that at all. Instead, when he got up and he roasted people. He roasted, I have to say it, I can't avoid saying it, Ivan Yates. He then moved on to saying that he had sought media advice from Ivan Yates before appearing at the event. Once he got certain advice from Ivan Yates, which I'm not going to respond, for which he said he paid a monkey. He moved on to Terry Prone. He then moved on to slagging off Mandy Johnson. All these friends of the
Matt
programme.
Cooper?
Yep. He then got to slagging off where he claimed that he had a file on me. And then, quite amusingly, he got to Miriam O'Callaghan and his sister, of course. Yeah. And to say, like, you know, he went to her for media advice and she said, oh, Jim, I couldn't be giving you media advice. You know, that would be inappropriate, all the rest of it. I won't be interviewing you, all the rest of it and stuff. And then she wavered and she said, well, I will give you 3 pieces of advice. And he started the first thing and he went into about the makeup. You know, all this and in fairness, he had the room laughing, right?
Yeah.
And then he finishes and he goes. And for everyone was saying, I know, as he was on his way out, I did mention, and I know you were there as well, Lise, the night of Miriam's book launch.
Yeah.
And you were there, weren't you, for that book? No, you were at Terry Prone's book launch. You were there. So at Miriam's book launch, Miriam O'Callaghan said, and she was thanking everybody, and she started thanking her family members, but she started talking about her mother who's also Miriam, who's in her late 90s. And it was a remarkable woman. Like, she's 97 and she's as sprightly as you can imagine and really with it. So she said that, as Miriam Junior, can you say Miriam Junior the woman? But anyway, as Miriam, the TV presenter, said, I've been on the television 32 million times, but every time Jim comes on the television, there's a WhatsApp message goes around from my mother, oh look, Jim is on the television. And on the night I was so tempted to sort of shout out in front of him. He's like, he might be on the telly an awful lot more often in the future. So I actually decided, as Jim O'Callaghan was going out of the room, I'd tell that story and say, so Jim, tell your mother you might be on the telly an awful lot more in the future. It remains to be seen as to whether he will.
He might. I would argue he's not ready yet. I think he will be the next leader of Fianna Fáil. I think he will be Taoiseach one day. I think he's done really well as a Justice Minister so far, and he's very good with the media. How good is he on the ground? Like, he's great if you go to the Aviva now when Ireland are playing South Africa or whatever. He'll be great in that setting. How good would he be down at the ploughing? I think there's a question mark about that.
Hang on a second. I mean, I had the great fortune of seeing Leo Varadkar at his first ploughing, and it was so dire that I actually...
How did that work out?
Well, yeah, but there you go. But the point is...
No, sorry.
But the thing is, by the time I saw him at a second ploughing, he had clearly got...
Yeah. That's right. Isn't Jim O'Callaghan, essentially, as Miriam reminds us regularly, Jim, the family, they're all from country stock. Mother, Miriam, is from the Midlands. Their father was from Kerry. They spent an enormous amount of time growing up in rural Ireland.
Yeah. Look, of course he can adapt. I'm saying at the moment, I would think his weaknesses are that I'm not sure he's a people person in the way you need to be in Irish politics. There's a line around Leinster House that he enjoys a good work-life balance.
That's damning, isn't it?
As Taoiseach, no, that is unfair. I think he will be. I think he's been a very good minister. I think he will lead Fianna Fáil. But what's the rush? He's been a cabinet minister for what?
Less than a year.
Less than a year.
Yeah.
I don't think that's long enough.
Okay, listen, we've got to finish. We have been yapping on. We didn't even get to talk about Holly Kearns' interviews on RT, the Late Late Show, and with the Irish Times. Maybe we'll get to that another day. It's been great having you, Lise Hand and Shane Coleman. Thank you very much for joining me on the show. As I said, Dan O'Brien, very interesting, already recorded for the subscription edition, which will be available on Sunday, in particular talking about immigration and home ownership, and also American investment in Ireland and Israel and things like that. I think you'll enjoy that. And then we'll have other people with us next week, and Marion McKeown in the second subscription edition, available next Wednesday evening. So, and thank you to Tom and Aidan for putting it all together. So from me, Matt Cooper, thank you very much for having been with us.